So today we're going to talk a little bit more about procurement, and then we'll wrap up this afternoon talking with our sister associations and their leaders, really looking at a broad national scope of what's happening among all of the national associations. But first, we want to introduce you to our panel, and I'm super excited about this today. We're going to have a city and state and private sector conversation around procurement. This is into the unknown, new normal, new challenges, new opportunities. And again, we're excited to have our panelists who will be here with us today. We're going to first hear from Mike Hook, who is head of the public sector at Ivalua. Then we also have former Lieutenant Governor, former Senator, former Secretary of State, and now current Chief Administrative Officer, Jay Jardin from Louisiana. We have Tui Moshe, the Supply Chain Manager from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and then Ed Jimenez, Assistant Director of the Arizona State Procurement Office. So Mike, let me tee it up with you and let you start our conversation this afternoon.
All right, great. Thanks, Pam. I will go ahead and share my screen. You should be seeing my screen now. All right. As you said, into the unknown. As you can tell, Frozen has been playing a little too many times in my household over the last couple of months. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to give some opening remarks, but then really want to get to who everyone's here to hear from, the experts and the panelists that you just heard about. So before I jump right into it, one of the things I want to say is thank you. Thank you to all of the frontline responders who have put themselves at risk, as well as the state and local governments that have had their backs over the last couple months. I think you'll hear in the next slide, I'm a big basketball fan. So as Kevin Durant would say, you all are the real MVPs. So where it started, again, to kind of give some remarks, is the March 13th, 2020, which it was a Friday the 13th as well. I was actually on site with one of our customers to meet with their procurement leadership staff. And the day before that, March 13th, March Madness was canceled. Like I said, I'm a big basketball guy, so cried myself to sleep that night. As everything was starting to happen and close down, March Madness was kind of the tip of the iceberg. Needless to say, the meeting the next morning didn't go as planned. Chief Procurement Officer and their leadership team were pulled out to start responding to basically overnight going to shift to a virtual workforce. So fast forward a couple hours, I'm on a plane, staring out the window, the last time I was on a plane, flying back to DC. And on that flight home, it was, starting to reflect on some of the questions of how would this affect people across the world? The economy, the jobs. What about our customers? How would this impact kind of where they were in their process? How would this impact procurement's role across the public sector, which we'll hear a lot about on the panel today? And what would the new normal look like? And I think the biggest thing when you look at some of the opportunity that's come out of the new normal is, would some of this change be here to stay? And then selfishly, for me, doing a lot of travel, it was an opportunity to get out of the plane, stop traveling so much. Except about a month in, I sent an article, a link to my wife in the morning as a little joke, and kind of backfired. The next thing I know, she came down wearing a sweatshirt. And as you can see, the article I sent to her highlighted one of the points of an invisibility sweatshirt. So what has been highlighted during this? So one of the things that, is the government's tipping point. When you look at digital government, it's nothing that's kind of a new concept, but really the acceleration of the adoption of digital tools to support a new virtual workforce. We've all heard and probably read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. I think given the current economic conditions and what COVID brought on was really that forced tipping point. And we see both ends of the spectrum, some still having somewhat of a paper-based operation, some that are fully digital and have adopted tools, and some with a mix, some paper manual processes and legacy systems, but really bringing that together through the lens of how do they enable the workforce. Emergency preparedness. So I think this goes outside and just highlighted the response, whether it's emergency procurement, the need for PPE equipment, and how procurement responded. Each state has its own emergency procurement, but when you look at kind of the things that needed to be enacted to support the frontline responders, make sure they had the goods needed to keep people safe and then safe, it was kind of a couple things we'd see is from a supply base, were they able to quickly look at their suppliers and know who could support emergency procurement needs. One of the other big things we saw across states and across agencies was inventory on hand. So not only going out and looking at net new purchases, but did they have visibility up and down their supply chain into inventory on hand where they needed to replenish or they could pull from inventory to support the emergency preparedness. And then the next one being procurement in the future workforce. So I think, we all say the new normal, but I think portions of this are here to stay. And some of that being good around the digital, kind of what they've accelerated through the digital procurement. I think one of the things that probably sticks out is, that Friday when I came home, a whole state was going from physically located in the same building to a completely virtual workforce. And so telework that's, rare in the public sector, and technology plays a role in making that happen. But I think what's unique is it's forced organization and vendors to focus on the human side of digital transformation, at least as much as the technical side, and including new ways of working. And then supplier risk and performance, I'm going to go into that on the next slide, is really when you're identifying the supply base and expedited but diligent. So again, do we really need 20-page questionnaires? Kind of trying to eliminate some of the red tape, but making sure all of the controls are there and in place to make sure the vendor is vetted diligently as part of that onboarding process. Qualify, requalify, and pre-qualify. So looking at your existing supply base, we had customers that went out to their vendors with an RFI to requalify, because as we've seen, some suppliers have retooled, some to make sure their businesses are still viable and stay in business, and some direct response to the COVID-19 situation. And I think the other piece you see here is from a local preference, supplier diversity, how do you build qualified lists so in future emergency responses, you have a qualified list that you can pick from while including the local preference and supplier diversity. And then the last one really around restructured contracts. So when you look at the impact that COVID has had, I mentioned the economic impact, but the loss of revenue for states and how can they leverage procurement, not only from a value standpoint, but also to potentially be a source of additional revenue. So we've heard a little bit this week about the performance-based contract, value-based contracting, which is a huge shift versus looking at it simply as a contractual document. But we also see the focus on potential expansion of cooperative agreements or cooperative strategies where that becomes a revenue and income source, as well as policy or legislation evaluation for whether it's admin fees to look at, again, bringing revenue in as part of the overall procurement function. And then again, robots are not going to replace us, but from a technology lens, really what we're seeing based on the new normal is self-service is the norm. When you look at just moving from kind of a centralized model to that decentralized model, making sure that the tool sets and the toolkit that you have for your employees are intuitive. They want to be able to log into an application, whether it's submitting a purchase request, but being able to do it without lots of hands-on training. The do more with less. So again, really trying to be more efficient and the continued automation. Again, not replacing, but moving to a more of an exception-based process, not checking the box for the sake of checking the box, but really having the tools in place which flags information within a process that it requires your review. And then the next two go hand in hand. You have more and more data in public sector. We've heard all about the open data transparency. That's been a focus over the last couple years, but I think really what we're seeing is open architecture. There's not a one tool, one platform solves all. It's really within your toolkit and solutions, which ones play nice together and integrate, where it's really that open architecture and optimizes the solution set for state and local governments. And then we talked about the focus on value creation versus cost savings. So really looking at value-based, performance-based contracting. And then really in closing, our team talks about opportunity. And this is an opportunity to continue to deliver on our promise of partnership. And one of the things I like to harp on, and again, it's my bad Frozen joke, but as we all press on to the unknown, remember, we will get through this together and we'll be stronger on the other side. But in the meantime, don't forget, be kind, be helpful, and be human. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Scott so we can get to the wonderful panel we have in store for everyone. I appreciate everyone's time.
Well, Mike, thank you very, very much for that. Be kind, be helpful. And speaking as the father of 3 young daughters, I think I can sing the soundtrack to Frozen 1, Frozen 2, or Frozen 3, if that's out yet. I can see various people agreeing with me on that front. They also sing Hamilton at the top of their voices and hoping that their British father will play the role of Mad King George. I'm yet to do that on camera, but if we make the right donations to the right charity, maybe I'll do that one time. So my name's Scott Wayne. I'm a moderator and facilitator, and we've partnered with NASCA for this series to co-produce this event between studios in Lexington, Kentucky and Richmond, Virginia. I'm in the Richmond studio here right now. But I will say I'm having a few flashbacks to my first arrival in the United States when I was a young diplomat, and I was posted to the United States with the mission to influence government policy here in the United States. So that would be lieutenant governors in Louisiana. But I was actually based in the consulate in Los Angeles, and so I was trying to bid for UK contracts for the LA Water and Power Department. Tui, your predecessor, I would have been trying to influence to buy UK goods. And Ed, I also covered Arizona, so spent a lot of time flying back and forth to Arizona to try to hustle with you all. And now I've got to hustle you for real, genuine opinions. So my job is to break those speaking points and get some good, gritty reality here on camera for the members and participants of NASCA. So I'm not going to ask you to do introductions. I'd love if you could weave into your answers sort of the perspective of your role and just give us an update on that. But Ed, I'm going to start in Arizona, and I want you to think about as we dove into this crisis and you had to transform the way that you were operating government to respond to this crisis. What policies and procedures did you find that you had to reinvent? And interesting, did you have to go to legislatures to do this, or did the bureaucracy allow for the changes itself within state and city government?
Yeah. Hey, Scott, thanks for the questions and for the panel and the audience. It's a pleasure to be here from the great state of Arizona. Wish for a little bit cooler weather, but hey, we can't have everything here. But happy to be here on the panel. So I'd like to start with some thoughts and some comments on your questions there, Scott. So I'll start with when the pandemic hit, March timeframe, whatever, for Arizona, and I'm sure all other states, it caught us all kind of by surprise. Basically, the health needs basically doubled, in the state of Arizona, if not more, because of the COVID activity. The federal stockpiles that came in fell short of the PPE commodities for our state entities and our hospitals. So we had some we started at the bottom, if you would, and we had to find ways to fill those pipelines because of those shortfalls. We also found that when the distribution took place of the federal stockpile in Arizona, products that came into the hospitals were vintage shelf life, products. Some were like 2009 N95 masks. Hospitals reached out to us and said, hey, we can't use these. We tried to put them on, the air loops broke off, type of thing. So obviously some challenges with the federal stockpile going forward. But the good news there is I was able to participate in a health association briefing where they pulled in the admiral from the Pentagon whose sole focus is in supply chain and logistics. And what a great presentation. It may be online someplace. I could probably try to find that. But boy, it brought back memories from my Boeing days of working with the military, making sure the soldiers had all the products they need, our logistics went well. This guy's gonna do phenomenal. And I expect the next federal stockpile is gonna be a positive thing for all of the nation, if you would. So I wanted to start with that. And I look forward to seeing more about how that admiral moves forward, if you would, out there. So we'll start with that. So what did we do in Arizona? So the pandemic immediately gave us an eye-opening that we needed to identify, better processes, better understanding of customer needs. How are we going to better manage the inventories? How are we going to do our procurements going forward? So we had to step back and assess that. And while we did that, we immediately partnered with our Department of Health Services, FEMA, and our agency customers. We stood up a health emergency operations center we stood up a state emergency operations center, one to cover the health requirements, one to cover the state entity requirements, if you would, for first responders and other folks there. And we then sent out a survey across the state. In the state of Arizona, we support 122 agencies, councils, boards, plus all other state entities in Arizona. So it's pretty huge. It goes across 15 counties. So what this survey did is we asked all these state customers, what are your needs for PPE? What type of requirements? What are your current inventory levels? You know, so we can gain that information before we reached out to our suppliers to solicit help. We had a very good idea as to the volume that we were going to need. And obviously it was in the millions of quantities, right? So the challenges we had is you had the federal government had first priority of all the inventory at suppliers. I mean, that was a given. Then you had the global outreach and the national outreach to those suppliers. So we're starting from behind here with the supply base. So we had to tell ourselves, boy, how do we go do this? How do we go vet all these new suppliers? How do we get our current supply base in? And so the changes in policy, no real legislative changes, Scott. What we had is our great governor, Doug Ducey. He identified the appropriate funding buckets for us to work with our state customers. That was very handy in helping us get commitments, get purchase orders out there upfront to a lot of suppliers who may had some capacity, may had some available inventory. And I can talk more about that in some of the other questions there. But clearly a lot of challenges for the state of Arizona, but we found a way forward. And the important thing is working with your state customers and keeping that communication chain open and understanding the government regulations, the different buckets of funding like the CARES Act and grants and things like that. So we pulled all that together to try to help us move forward. And the process is going fairly well right now.
Ed, I love that. You know, you're keeping the communication flow going with the state, leaning on the feds where you can. And I loved your commentary that Governor Ducey sort of created the buckets from you all to draw from. It's a very visual description. And maybe that's a segue to Jay, because Jay, you've worked both as on the administration side, as you are currently, but also as a lieutenant governor. What does that look like from the inside in terms of making those choices? But also, these crises are often opportunities for innovation. So in Louisiana, of the things that you've changed as a result of the crisis, what are you going to keep for the long term?
Thank you. And first of all, let me thank all the folks who are on the line and the state workers and governmental workers, local government workers. We've certainly seen during this pandemic how well the public sector has stepped up, an often unappreciated area, and it certainly has been eye-opening for me to deal with this from the position that I'm in right now. Keep in mind, at the outset of the pandemic, Louisiana was one of the hardest hit earliest states. We had more cases pro rata early on in the first couple of weeks or month of this event than anywhere else in the country. So we were slammed very early in the process of procuring as many items as we could and we thought we would need, as well as standing up temporary hospitals. We had to, in essence, procure a hospital inside the New Orleans Convention Center. So our procurement staff was challenged very early on. We were obviously under an emergency declaration, I think as everyone is, and that affords us some flexibility in procurement. I am blessed with an excellent procurement staff, a great director, and she's got some great folks working with her who helped us navigate the difficult waters in the early days. We had a request for qualification process that was established so that we could, we didn't suspend our procurement code. We still had to follow certain provisions, but we obviously had to act quickly, and we were acting extremely quickly, but we were still trying to make certain we afforded opportunities for competitiveness and for getting different qualifications and quotations in particular from folks who could help us build a hospital and staff a hospital and get the necessary PPE that everyone was looking for. And as Ed mentioned, this was not a localized disaster like we're used to in Louisiana with a weather event. This affected everybody across the country. So we're all clamoring for the same stuff at the same time. And it made it a very difficult challenge to navigate the federal overlay, trying to gather PPE, and nevertheless making states and localities be on their own to get what they could get. So that request for qualification or request for quote process really helped us, and it's something we're obviously going to be continuing going forward. We're all still dealing with this, so we haven't had a chance to fully step back and reflect, do an after action assessment of where we're going, but I think we can all probably agree that the new world order and the new normal is going to include meetings like this, a lot less travel and a lot of dealing in this virtual world. And that is also going to affect the procurement process, because I think you're going to see, as we've seen here, pre-bid meetings and conferences taking place by Zoom and requiring people to participate this way, this being the exception, being the rule rather than the exception. I think that's probably the most dramatic change that we're going to all have to experience going forward. And it's certainly going to take the procurement sectors and all of our organizations to take a close look at their practices and their policies and seeing exactly what changes are appropriate. I can't tell you exactly right now how many of the things that we're doing in an emergency context are going to be carried over into the new normal, but I dare say it's going to be a significant amount of what we're doing right now.
Yeah. Mike, can I throw this to you? Are you seeing, as Jay's describing there, a change in the way that the public sector is interacting with the private sector? And what do you suspect is going to continue from those, that emergency style, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been more collaboration, for sure. I also think sometimes where you think about public sector, I highlighted the do more with less. So I think when you look at across public sector, especially now looking at just the impact of budgets, but we've always dealt with whether funds have been pre-encumbered, encumbered, or budget cuts have been. Public sector is one of the most innovative groups there are out there, because they're used to looking at finding budget or doing more with less. So I think you're kind of seeing a leapfrog effect where some of the kind of what I said forced tipping point is a lot of organizations were thinking about this digital transformation, maybe some of the things that we would think were standard on the private sector side, but really adopting it and adopting it fast. And then the other thing, I mean, we're on it now, Zoom. Jay highlighted it too, we were talking about it earlier, is the ability to just kind of not miss a beat. And whether it's a Board of Public Works procurement review for a critical procurement, still making sure that whether it's an emergency procurement or standard procurement, the right controls are still being facilitated, just in a different avenue or platform.
Yeah.
Scott, let me add one other thing that just came to mind. We, as a matter of policy, we would not prepay for anything. We were all clamoring for the same items, and there were a lot of vendors out there demanding or at least requesting some prepayments and pay us in advance, give us money down. We just didn't do that, and we were very worried about that from a competitive standpoint, because everybody was after the same thing we were after, but we were very reluctant, and just as a matter of policy, to do that. I'm sure other entities did prepay on some things or had policies similar to ours, but that was one of the biggest, toughest challenges I think we faced at the outset of the pandemic, where we all seemed to be competing with one another for the same limited resources, and it made it very challenging. But I must say there was great coordination among organizations like this one and others, and the National Governors Association, communicating as a group to Washington and trying to speak with one voice so that we could deliver that message as we balance the federal role versus a state role versus a local role.
Yeah, Jay, that's fascinating. And I think as we think about future sessions at NASCA and in collaboration with NASPO, is how you better improve those communication channels. And of course, given my nationality, we were seeing the same thing on the other side of the Atlantic, with European countries outbidding each other for the same material, particularly from China, and literally racing Air Force, cargo craft out there to try to get the first bid. It was quite the scene on both sides of the Atlantic. The innovation, I think, that you're touching on is fascinating, because it does go from sort of a national and state level down to a local level. And Tui, I'm going to bridge over to you now. As a former resident of Los Angeles, I know that LA Water and Power has run endless scenarios around forest fires, earthquakes, but pandemics, that's a new one, or at least a new one outside of a Hollywood studio. What innovations have you seen in terms of procurement in Los Angeles that you've been impressed by, and maybe what have been a couple of mistakes or bumps in the road?
So as I believe Jay mentioned earlier, we have a charter that has kind of really saved us, that we have written in where, we have our mayor has mandated that it was emergency. because oftentimes our charter dictates that, you know, like a lot of government agency, that we go through a competitive bidding process. So declaring it as emergency kind of really helps us, I wouldn't say bypass, but accelerate our ability to make purchases quicker. But to give a little history, you know, LADWP procurement, as the way we process things, works in two dichotomy, where I support the business side of our e-procurement system, where half of our system internally, like creating the PO, making the recommendation, the rec side, is all electronic, automated, streamlined, seamless. But then our other half, to no fault of our own, resulted in that we had to work from a outside or public perspective, like the vendor management system or the solicitation part was a very manual, very labor intensive. And when this pandemic hit, it kind of, you know, our GM was like saying, oh no, we need to close our vendor liaison center, which is where our vendors were dropping off of the responses to our solicitation. And then of course, you know, our mail system can be unreliable because it kind of, we're unique in a way where it goes through a different post office before it comes into our office. So, and our said, well, got to be timestamped by this deadline or it's non-responsive. So with this pandemic, we closed out the system. And so that, what do we do now? And that's where a lot of, like, our partnership with iValua came in, where I was challenged with, how do you fix this, TUI, in a sense where now that we close this off, but now how do you offer a secure and transparent way for our vendor now to submit responses? So I started reaching out to a lot of my contacts, Mike and Jane being one of them from iValua. And in the end, we end up partnering with iValua to help address some of these procurement pain points. And in a matter of 5 weeks, I think one of our big success was to take it from that side of manual dropping solicitation to now having a virtual box for our vendor to submit private, secure, transparent process for our vendor to see in a matter of 5 weeks. It was a lot of the painful process in that, where bumps we learned was, like, you know, part of our charter requires that at the time of bid closing, we do a public bid opening. We had some ups and downs with our WebEx issues, technology issue, because our buyers then have to translate. Well, I used to go down to the office and read out the bids. Now I got to do it through this new platform. So it was part of that, trying to build in that mechanism where now, hey, you know, when the bid opened, it's transparent now. You guys don't even have to deal with that. But at the beginning, we had to learn that when the pandemic hit, how to use WebEx, how to get our vendor to sign on to WebEx, how to transition our vendors into this new procurement workflow and lifestyle. So, but we are getting along it, and partnership with iValua has really helped us transition to using technology to transition us into a place where we can now start to pick up businesses again and get into the flow of our normal procurement duties.
So I love the shout out to iValua. And Mike, heads up, I'm about to put your feet to the flames in a minute after all those good things that Turi said about you. Don't get comfortable. Turi, I think this is fascinating. I would guess, having worked in this field just a little bit, that the reason you had a separate post office was actually an anti-terrorist move, that probably coming from the anthrax attacks, that you're putting a third party between you and the civic office. So it's interesting that one crisis contingency actually got in the way of you responding to another crisis contingency. And Mike, here it comes. So Jay touched on sort of request. He politely said request. I suspect it was almost demands for prepayment. How, you as a sort of advisor and intermediary in this, how do you protect from the public sector being gouged by the private sector when there's all of this pressure from citizens and residents to get the material in place where it needs to be? What do you do in that role to bring that transparency that Tui was talking about?
Yeah, so I think it starts with the access and transparency to the data. So being able to look at kind of the using historical data, not to just overanalyze, but use that more in a predictive nature to look at what is fair and open, what suppliers are providing. And then really what we've seen a shift in, and we talked about a little bit of the performance-based contracting. So not even technology focused of just how the procurement mindset has looked at specific performance and milestones, and using that as a part, and looking at vendors that are out there from a true partnership. You know, ourselves, and I know other vendors from a support standpoint, really partnering to support and be there to help organizations like this. So kind of Jay alluded to the prepayment and some of that, which is, you know, from a materials and getting goods in, but also where there's something that from a control, transparency, and access to that data, if there's a model where you can defer payment or have kind of that trial, you use a platform to support that. But really what we've seen is it's the data, but data where it's actionable, being able to look at what's historically been purchased. And again, the big piece is the supplier vetting, not to come back to that, because there's your existing supply base and new suppliers. You have kind of there's a difference between, you know, having an opportunity or being opportunistic. And so that's really where you got to strike the balance of looking at how you vet your suppliers. Again, that it's expedited, but diligent. And that really starts at upfront onboarding of the supplier to kind of the analysis when you're looking at actually making an award.
So not getting swamped with the data, but using data as actionable intelligence to pre-filter and ensure that you're going to get the relationship that you need.
Yep.
Okay. So Tui spoke about shifting from an in-person paper-based system to a digital system and onboarding suppliers to WebEx and the like. Ed and Jay, I'm going to come back to you. What about digitizing your own teams and how you operate? I assume you're working on remote bases in Arizona and Louisiana. How are teams living up to this, and what are you doing to drive that performance and mental health of your employees? Maybe Ed, we start with you in Arizona.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Scott. First, I want to just add on to Jay and Tui's comments. The state of Arizona, we would not allow any advance payments. I got so much pressure from the governor's office, agencies who were reached out to by new suppliers. And I mean, the pressure was pretty huge, but we have a strong procurement policy in Arizona. And from day one, we brought all the procurement administrators, CPOs together and said, look, we're going to stay the course here. We're going to find product for these customers, and we're not going to do advance payments. And to this day, we have not done that. We've still been successful following the procurement process, if you would. Okay. With regards to, you know, the new working from home, you know, keeping people, you know, performance going forward, making sure we stay on track. We still have our standard metrics, scorecards, business reviews with our customers out there. The one good thing we have in Arizona is, I'll go back to the governor again. When he came on board, he brought in these new tools. Mike is familiar with this, the Arizona Management System. And what these tools did is it helped you identify your projects, what were the problems, how do you track those, how do you measure those, how do you communicate those to your customers. And these were live walls in various divisions where you had regular huddle boards with your customers to keep track of things going. When the pandemic hit, Scott, what we did is we digitized those, and we now do virtual huddles. And these huddles take place in 15 minutes. We go through a standard deck of activity with our customers, and the customers love it. So that's kind of how we transitioned.
That's great. And it sounds like everybody's seeing that as an improvement. It was a forced change, but an improved change.
Yes, it was a continuation of where we were going with the AMS tools, and everybody does this. You lean out your processes, you drop your lead times. Customers appreciate getting their products quicker, not having a one-year solicitation out there on the street, if you would, right? So just, it's about the continuous improvement here at Arizona.
Jay, in Louisiana, you described earlier being at the forefront of the outbreak. Some of those numbers were staggering, especially clustered around New Orleans. So you're pushing your employees to virtual operations. How did that impact the performance of your teams?
Not surprisingly, working at home is proven very popular among employees. There was some initial concern with supervisors about accountability and about how you would manage, but really it's been a very good experience in the height of the pandemic. We were not prepared to have as much virtual work as we had to have, but fortunately we had a stockpile of computers because not everybody had work at home equipment, but we had enough resources on hand that we could get into this new world order pretty quickly. And we had to, because as you say, New Orleans was a hot spot and Baton Rouge was right on the trail. And Baton Rouge, of course, is the capital where most of the state employees are. We have several high-rise buildings downtown where there's a concentration of state employees. And obviously those buildings were sparsely populated during the height of the pandemic. And really now that we've had this resurgence, but we were able to transition to it pretty well. And everybody seems to be doing all right with it. We know that one of our after action efforts is going to be looking at this very issue, because I think long term it's going to have a profound impact on commerce in America and really in the world, as you see more people, private sector, public sector, saying, I can get this job done working at home. I don't need to lease as much office space, for example, or build as many buildings as we now have, because more people are able to be productive at home. And I think that'll be a real cutting edge discussion that we'll be having over the course of the next several years as we react to what's happened.
Yeah, and I imagine not least because the pressure that's going to be on state budgets as a result of the expenditures you've had to.
Well, that's right. But of course, it also affects those in the private sector who are leasing buildings or who are dealing with government and seeing a shrinking government overall, and a change in the workforce utilization of space is all going to have a bearing on both the public sector and the private sector.
Tui, staying on that subject, you're based in a very expensive city. Where assets and real estate come at a premium. Which technologies have you used to run virtual operations, and which do you think you'll keep that may have implications for reducing other costs down the line?
Well, before I start into that, to add what Jay was saying, he's lucky enough where he had a stockpile of like laptops. Unfortunately, we did not, and a lot of these parts, as you can see, came from China, like our processors. So we had, in a matter, had to order like 2,000 laptops for an employee. Luckily for mine, just in the sense in my group, where we do a lot of presentation, I had a lot of my teams go straight to laptops versus desktop. So my group was a little bit minimally unaffected, but a lot of our procurement staff worked on desktops, and we have dual monitors, huge dual monitors. Now, how do we address those if they're working from home? We had to buy adapters for people so they can project stuff on like maybe their TV. That's what I was doing when I was at home, taking my laptop and projecting my screen onto the laptop, because we're working in multiple screens, buying webcams. And shout out to our IT, department, because they were a huge, crucial, player in this pandemic, because they had to think about remote access for all 11,000 employees. How do we get webcams for everybody? How do we clear it so there's no cybersecurity issues with the webcam, because they're connecting, through our intranet. But those are some of the challenges we were facing with technology. What we are keeping, I think we had to switch to a lot of, like everybody else's, virtual-based meetings, WebEx, training. Prior to the pandemic, I already started piloting, because I'm part of, I run the purchasing card program in my group. And so we started digitizing signatures on forms. And we started that as a pilot, but that kind of COVID-19 kind of really helped me trying to push digital signatures within our division. So then we started creating digital signature for our contracts. So that's something we'll also probably moving forward, we'll continue to keep. Right now, I'm also part of the ERP project. We're looking at, software vendors and upgrading all of our systems. So we're working on that project to bring us into, new technology. We will probably continue to work with iValue to maintain and support, our solicitation and vendor management of the system. We're trying to go digital with a lot of things, because the biggest safety concern with a lot of our employees are paper touching. Like if somebody else touched something and I'm touching something, then this virus may potentially be on this paper. So we're trying to limit the amount of paper our employee have to touch. So we're digitizing a lot of our paper-based processes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Prioritization of technology over whether we touch it or not seems to be a determinant of investment, at least in the short term. Mike, before we move on.
Hey, Scott, can I jump in? I think one of the challenges we're all going to have going forward, the state of Arizona recently did a survey to all employees, upwards of 30,000 employees in the state who are working from home. There was a 95% positivity about working from home. So as we go forward, yeah, we have the challenges of reducing the footprints of buildings, things like that. But going forward, if folks are going to be asked to come back to work, that's going to be one of the challenges we have, because people are getting comfortable, and as long as they have all the tools to do their job from home, that'll be a challenge moving forward.
So
what goes, sorry, I'm going to add to Ed, what goes into this is, I'm not sure you across the world, but especially in Orange County, schools and districts are debating whether we go all virtual with our class, and everybody on this panel have kids, and I'm one of them where, like, how do I continue to show up into the office or work from home, but then support my kids who are also going virtually? That's the added challenge into this workforce that we're going to have to deal. And with DWP, we have set things in place where we have a policy for Modify where you can apply to continue being, if we ever like fully go back into the workplace, we also have exceptions for people. They can apply to be on modified telecommuting to support parents who are working parents, but also have kids who can't be in school. So
right. Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, this intersection of technology and how we live our lives. I was reminded a couple of days ago by a historian that modern day schooling came around as a result of the Industrial Revolution, which was a place for us to put our kids when we went to factories instead of working from home. And now we've reversed it. There is no school, so we've got to step away from the factories. What are we going to do about that? I would like to kind of move a little bit to communications in this. We talked about communications with employees on a basis, but you also have political masters to work for. And Jay, if you don't mind, I'd like to lean on you here because you have played both roles. What has this crisis forced in terms of communicating with governors and lieutenant governors and elected officials in cities across the state? And then Ed, I think I'd love to throw that question at you as well in terms of, Arizona is an enormous state with some large dense pockets and then some dispersed pockets. How are you just handling communications across states your size and so complex, both with state politicians and local politicians?
Yeah, definitely. You want Jay to go first?
Jay, maybe.
Go ahead,
Jay,
go
let's
ahead.
start with you.
I'm sorry, you want me to go? Okay. Well, it's critical. Unfortunately, we have a lot of experience in Louisiana with disasters and with crises, and that's usually they're limited in geographic scope and in time scope. A hurricane comes in, it hits a certain area, it's over, and then you have to react. Well, in this case, obviously, we all know everybody was impacted, and so there was an immediate need for strong communications from the state level to the federal level, and from localities who are looking to the state for some direction. And obviously, a lot of questions and conflicts arising as to gubernatorial authority versus mayoral powers and local government decisions that are being made. That's something that we're dealing with in Louisiana right now, and tensions between various branches of government as to who's in control and who does what. There's been a great line of communications, as I mentioned earlier, with the organizations providing a lot of the assistance in dealing with Washington. We all dealt with the CARES Act, and it was an unprecedented dumping of dollars by the federal government into our budgets. Usually the feds are going to reimburse you after you've spent some money. In this case, they're sending money, they're transferring money directly into the bank account for the state, and in some cases to localities as well. And then you've got to deal with how can you spend it and how can you make certain you're not going to spend it improperly so that there's a clawback a year from now, 10 years from now, whenever the government gets around to looking at whether you followed the guidelines that were issued. So it really stepped up the importance of the communication between state government, which I was involved in, and the federal government to make certain we got answers to questions. And we were all asking similar questions and we were all getting answers, and we got them pretty quickly, I must say, from the Treasury in terms of how you use the CARES dollars. That was the biggest communication challenge that was met fairly early in the pandemic. Because of this is an annual occurrence for us. We have a very well-defined disaster management plan at what we call a unified command group that meets regularly in anticipation of a weather event or during it. That was activated and is still activated right now as we go through the pandemic. So we're meeting literally as needed twice a week, or at a minimum once a week, in the early days every day, to talk about the responsibilities of all aspects of government and which departments we're going to be communicating with local governments. And that became even more important with our state getting dollars that were to be redirected to local government because of the way the CARES Act was written. By and large, that communication, I would say overall, has been very effective from the federal level to the state level, from the state level to the local level. But we had an advantage because we're used to doing this, and we're used to dealing with FEMA on a regular basis. We're used to knowing how to handle federal dollars, and that gave us a leg up for, I know, a number of states and municipalities that don't have disasters as frequently as we do in Louisiana.
Who would have thought that a sort of expertise of state would be crises, that you're, because of
it has become an absolute expertise of the state, and our folks, our FEMA folks and National Guard folks, are constantly going to other states to provide assistance and direction on as they're trying to understand and ramp up what they should do in the face of a crisis.
That is remarkable. Ed, I want to put a lens on the same question to you, but earlier today in our morning session, the Chief Procurement Officer of the state of Maine made the comment that we're in an emergency situation, but not everything is an emergency. How, through that lens, how are you differentiating to your stakeholders what really is that crisis issue and what is it?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. First, let me start by saying, I work in the Department of Administration, and our director Andy Tobin, happened to be speaker for quite a while in Arizona. So he knows everybody in the state, and I mean everybody. I go with him off-site to League of Cities and Towns, and everybody's calling him by first name. He's taken us to the House of Representatives, the Senate, to meet everybody. That's how fortunate I have been in this role in the procurement office. And so we got to make those relationships with all these key state senators, governors, everybody. So there's no shortage or lack of communication across the state. Our state also has what we call enterprise initiatives. The pandemic is one thing which we're all working together to focus on that. Other emergencies are, hey, we all have to run our business. We've got contracts expiring. We've got some great tools with our new procurement system, thanks to folks like Mike and others there, that we can keep everybody on track to monitor what's coming down the pike. The communication with our customers, a year prior to my coming to the state, customers didn't want to come to the state procurement office because they felt they were kind of taking up procurement's time, or they weren't wanted. That has all changed now. So it's completely a flip of the coin, where customer outreach is just every single day in a good way. I mean, so that's a real positive feeling. They see that the procurements are done in a timely fashion. They're not done manually, they're electronically. They get their information, they participate on committees with us. Before statements of work are built up, our customers are involved in that. They're on our VAL committees, okay? How do we keep in the communication kind of transparent is the governor has a weekly press conference. And he does that with the whole state. Some of you may have seen that and watched that. Then that press conference highlights are flown down in a weekly meeting we have with all procurement personnel within the state, with all customers within the state and the state entities, if you would. And then we have our weekly one-on-one meetings. I reach out personally to directors every single day, or vice versa, they'll reach out to us. I just think we have a really good group of state employees, customers who are really gelling and working together. So communication hasn't been an issue for us in Arizona.
That's great.
Can I piggyback on what Ed's saying? Is I think during this pandemic, I've noticed like the flow of, up, down, and vice versa. I've seen that flow has increased, like from our mayor to our general manager, down to our chief administrative officer, to my director, to us. The flow of information, because this pandemic, a lot of the things are unknown, and who it's touching, how it's affecting us. We want to know that, and sometimes with employees they want more communication. Sometimes the image is that we're not getting enough from the top down. But I feel like they made it a top priority to make sure, they're communicating what's going on, what our leadership is doing to address safety concerns, talking to our customer. We have a vendor liaison center that's purely just to take calls from customers. I handle a technical help desk side to escalate issues and handle the internal customers. So we try to constantly keep the communication flowing, especially in this time where everything is virtual. We need to, keep everybody informed.
I love it. And speaking as somebody who lives in the state capital, I'm in Richmond, Virginia here. It's a terrible time to be a political handler, as all the leadership wants to talk directly to everybody in the front line, which I think is wonderful to watch. Mike, on that basis, what are you seeing nationally in terms of states that are doing a great job in communicating with stakeholders, but particularly in the private sector? What's not lost is that we're going through an enormous economic impact of this. Business owners are having to grapple with their own crises while also trying to serve the national interest. What does the private sector need to know from the public sector that helps them step up?
So I think the biggest thing, and we've heard our wonderful panelists kind of already hit on it, is the transparency and then the frequency. So obviously when this happened, there's still a lot of uncertainty, but the frequency of communication, and I think kind of that openness and directness that we've seen from just an overall, there's people not knowing how's this going to affect my day-to-day life. Tomorrow could change. And so just hearing directly, you mentioned, especially in the political world, hearing directly from those people in leadership and those positions, I've just seen tremendous value in kind of easing that uncertainty and making folks feel okay about what the next day has in store. So for me, they hit it on the head, and the most successful I've seen is really that level of transparency, but the frequency and the clearness of the communication, what they can expect. And it's okay to say, right, that we don't know right now, but we're doing X, Y, Z in preparation or as part of our path forward.
Yeah, would you speak a little bit more to, there has to be barriers put in place between the public sector and the private sector, but we're also asking for more collaboration. How do you find that balance between, having the fiscal protective barriers in place, but also allowing that creativity to happen between private and public sector?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, obviously there's different controls and there's different process around the public sector. But I think bringing all of that together, it's again, just like you would on any kind of high performing team. You get people in the room and the brightest minds that are speaking up and collaborating to end up with the best end solution. I think there's been kind of too much of a firewall between private versus public. And I think kind of, especially in just the nature of operations of the private sector being impacted just as much as the public sector, is we're really seeing a blend of that. But then some of the things fiscally that Jay alluded to is the difference when you're looking at and even on the federal side, when you look at small business innovative research and SBIR programs, you're seeing a blend where the government's putting these funds out there to support. And I think you'll see kind of the coming together of how the private and public sector are both using those funds, but also making sure that the control and fiscal responsibility is there to show that those funds are being used, for the constituents.
Okay, I love it. We've got a couple of questions from the audience that I'm going to close this session with. This has been terrific. Thank you all. One is around, you've talked a lot around the crisis has almost allowed for innovation and efficiencies to happen in the processes of government. What legislative or regulatory changes do you think are needed to sort of take these advantages and keep them going sort of day to day once we're out of a crisis phase? And I open that to all of you. Are there things that you think need to happen within state legislatures that allow for that nimbleness of government that you're experiencing right now?
Hey, I'll take a crack at that, Scott. For Arizona, what I've seen in the 2+ years I've been there, you have our Arizona procurement code. You've got to go compete things like Tui and Jay know this. But when you have these pandemics and these emergency situations. We have gone out and done some emergency procurements. We could probably do a better job working with legislature to add some things, into the law, if you would, that automatically gives us that right to go there. They do in some senses, but we could probably do more with the learning curve. And as we learn and go forward here with the pandemic, there's probably a little bit more we can do with the legislative kind of in that area, I believe, because we see a lot of private suppliers now wanting to get into the PPE business. And for us, where they've had product and we brought them into an emergency situation, at the same time, we told them right after this contract, we're going to compete you. You have to be competed, kind of a thing, right? So there's a little bit there. We could use some help with the legislative team.
So I'm almost reminded of Jay's comments around Louisiana having an expertise in crisis, that you're almost trying to create the rules and guidance for whatever crisis comes up next. It might be a cybersecurity incident. It might be fascinating. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I love this question that's coming from the audience, which reminds me of that famous Donald Rumsfeld quote. But given there are so many unknowns out there, how are you doing scenario planning over what you should prepare for? And I put this to you. I enjoy meeting with these big strategy consulting firms that have their futurists, and I challenge them to see their report from 2015 that said that the star of Celebrity Apprentice would be leader of the free world, that Great Britain, while declaring it was a free trading nation, will have left the European Union, and that we'd all be locked down under a pandemic. So as you look into the future, how on earth are you doing scenario planning within your organizations for what you should prepare for?
Well, I can tell you in Louisiana, we're doing it as a matter of being forced to, because we're sitting here staring at hurricane season. All those on this call who are on coastal states, coastal communities, recognize the threat of a hurricane. And so imagine a major hurricane of Katrina nature, the other storms that we've experienced in the past decade, hitting any of our coasts in the midst of the pandemic. You're trying to evacuate coastal hospitals with COVID patients out of the storm harm's way. And at the same time, you're moving people into evacuation centers and trying to socially distance. The two are mutually exclusive when you think about it, but we have been having those types of sessions, talking about what do we do in the midst of this pandemic if and when that happens. This is projected to be one of the busiest hurricane seasons on record. August and September are typically the biggest months that we experience storms in the South, and particularly in Louisiana. And so we've been engaging in those tabletop exercises, not nearly as thoroughly as we normally do, because we're doing it while still dealing with the other crisis. But we've had to do it out of necessity, and that's something you just worry about. We were going to talk about what's your worst nightmare, and that's our worst nightmare, is a storm coming in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but hey, Scott, I'll jump in on this too, along with what Jay has said there about emergencies. In talking to our hospital partners, we're all gearing up for flu season coming with this COVID situation taking place. So we're out there getting stockpiles of syringes, needles, vials, all those things that are used for the flu season, because they have a terrible feeling what's going to happen, come this fall, and COVID's still going on. So we're trying to protect ourselves there and get a jump start to help them on those things. So.
With what DWP is doing, just because we're still in the middle of the pandemic, we're still planning for this pandemic to last however long it lasts. Even with the vaccine projected to come next year, we're still stocking up on hand sanitizer, paper towels, PPE equipment, gloves, everything that we need for our field crew. On top of that, we also, I'm pretty sure with every organization, we have an emergency management team. And every year we do this as an exercise. I'm not particularly part of it, but part of my executive team, everybody from supply chain, we have somebody from emergency management, we have somebody from each of our system, the power system, water system. They come in and they do these tabletop exercise. So scenario would be, okay, what if somebody hijacked, our control system? What do we do? So they play through a scenario and try to, okay, what will supply chain do? What will power system do? What will water system do? So we go through this exercise in order to prepare us for these type of emergency. We may not address every single scenario, but we go through this exercise to help us prepare better and to help to better respond. So I think, every organization have that type of exercise that, and I think it's important that we do that, and they communicate when they get the results, they communicate it down what they have done. So I think it's a really good thing that our leadership is doing to help, our organization stay focused and stay prepared.
Predicting the future. Good luck to all of us. But maybe I'll throw that to Mike to bring us home with respect to how Invalua sees the future. And what, well, let me put it this way. As a European living in the United States, I've had to deal with a lot of European questions. As Europeans suddenly understand the Constitution of the United States and realize that it's really the states that are at the forefront of this crisis and not national governments. What role do companies like Invalua and organizations like NASCA and NASPO play in terms of trying to take the lessons we've learned and share best practices over coming months for whatever is coming next? What are some lessons that we can take away from this, Mike?
So I think the first thing is sessions and the thought leadership series like we've been doing over the last couple of weeks are just of tremendous value. I think getting folks together and being able to share kind of experiences, what's worked, what hasn't worked, lessons learned is just so invaluable. And for me, that's kind of the biggest thing that I just love about public sector. Sometimes in private sector, it will seem that it's competitive intel or giving something away where there's really that true collaboration of, hey, how'd you solve this problem? Or in this case, how can we leverage suppliers maybe from state to state to get a better deal or make sure we have that stockpile in the future? And then from an Invalua perspective, I mean, we really see it. We want to be a partner in that journey. And I think when you look at the technology ecosystem, it's really coming back to, Ed mentioned it, the AMS system in Arizona. That's not, that whole process, the lean system isn't an Invalua tool, but there's parts that need to push in and play nice with the Invalua tool. So I think it's being there as a partner and making sure you're just part of the overall ecosystem. I really like the quote earlier this week about, you have a strategy prior to taking on a technology investment and technology is really an enabler versus going and getting a technology and then coming up with your strategy. And I just think that's critical to the overall success when technology is just going to continue to play more and more of a role as we all kind of continue with the new normal.
That's great. Well, on NASCA's behalf, let me thank you all very much. We are now going to hand over to the Lexington studio as we invite the next round of panelists to open their videos. But on our behalf from Richmond and Mike, I'm sure on Invalua's part, thank you all very much and thank you for your service.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Tui. Absolutely an amazing session. We are learning so much as we go along this journey, and it's people like you that we're learning from. So we really appreciate you being there. So now that we're going to pivot, we're going to make sure everyone is still with us, and we are going to launch a Slido question. So for those who are just tuning in, I am Jamie Rogers, NASCA's Deputy Director, and we've been using a tool called Slido. So we're going to ask everyone to go to slido.com. You're going to type in a code called NASCA20, and what you're going to see here in a second is a question on slido.com. And it is, why do you think the CAO's phone has rung most often from their governor? So if you're going to Slido, and I'm looking to my Richmond team, it looks like they are rapidly working on that and getting that.
Yes, we are, Jamie. As we've just been talking about technology crashes, we had a slight crash over here. So it should be on the screen right now, and you can either go to slido.com and enter code NASCA20, or put your camera up to that QR code and it will take you to the URL. Why do you think your CAO's phone rang most often from the governor? As you're doing this, as we just wrap our panel, we talked about changes that will be hard to bring back in the number of state employees who like working from home being difficult to return. I should say that Governor Northam here in Virginia really relaxed the liquor laws here in this Commonwealth, and I think he's going to have a nightmare putting those back in the bottle. So, co-working or.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And I'm seeing some excellent answers here on why our members' phones may have rang, from COVID to PPE to vendor calls, vendors calling the governor, technology, civil unrest, public transportation. So lots of reasons our members, their governors may have been calling them over the last couple of months. But now we're going to dive in and see what really happened. I am really excited for this next panel. I'm going to hand it over here in a little bit to the NASCA Vice President, Bram Stibitz, who is also leads our strategic partnerships for NASCA. At NASCA, we think really hard about our sister associations and how we work with them and collaborate with them and role model enterprise-wide collaborations with different agencies. And so for the last year, Bram, as our Vice President, has led those efforts, and I'm really excited to hand it over to him as we talk more about how our associations work together, as well as in the states, how the members they represent work together. So I'm going to introduce my panelists, and then I'm going to hand it over to Bram, who's going to moderate this session. So as I talked, we have Bram Stibitz. He is our NASCA Vice President, as well as newly named CIO in the state of Michigan. We also have Brian DeForest, who's going to represent the NASCA perspective. He is the Chief Administrative Officer for Enterprise Goods and Services in the state of Oregon, representing NASCA today. We also have Dennis Goulet. He is representing and the president of the National Association of Chief Information Officers, as well as the commissioner of the Department of Information and CIO for the state of New Hampshire. We also then will go across the country to Franklin Plastow, who is the new president of the National Association of State Personnel Executives, and he is the assistant director for human resources at the state of Washington. And then we'll come again across the country to Washington, D.C. We also have on the line today with us George Shooter, who is the president of the National Association of State Procurement Officers, as well as the chief procurement officer for the District of Columbia. And then our final panelist today is Hope Davis. She is the past president of the National Association of State Facilities Administrators, as well as the Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance, the Office of Facility Maintenance and Management for the state of Massachusetts. So Bram, the floor is yours. All of our panelists, if you will unmute yourself, we will take it all from there, and we're excited to dive in. All right, Bram.
All right, thank you, Jamie, and it's good to be on with so many people here today. So like Jamie said, you know, as chief administrators, we spend all day working with the procurement director or the CIO or, you know, the HR director, the personnel director. And so that's why it's so important for NASCA to have these relationships with these other associations. Much like, you know, like I say, I talk with those people every day. It makes sense that we would have a close relationship and that we would align our priorities with these other associations. And, you know, whenever we get the opportunity, we like to help each other out. So again, like Jamie said, I just want to thank everyone for being here with us today to go through this panel. And with that, we're just going to jump right in, and we're going to do just a quick round up front. We're going to give everyone on the panel 1 to 2 minutes to just quickly, you know, introduce yourself and talk about your agency, your mission, your priorities, and just very big picture, how your industry and your members' priorities have changed since COVID-19. And again, I will warn you, it is 1 to 2 minutes. I'm told that Jamie has a virtual shepherd's hook, and she will pull you if you talk too long. So Jamie, get your hook ready, and we will start off with Brian DeForest, representing NASCA.
All right, thanks, Bram. So I'm Brian DeForest. I've been in state government now for 29 years, spent 10 years in banking systems ahead of that. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at the Department of Administrative Services, which is the right-hand executive arm of the governor. And I think I'll just start with, you know, how have things changed? As with most admin services agencies, we're all things to all people. And even more so now, we become the glue in between all of our major programs and fill in the gaps where they cannot. And we do that because we've seen a little of everything, like the State Farm commercial. We've seen a few things, and so we know a lot of things. And Our agencies that couldn't pull off some of the more difficult tasks in our response, we were able to just come in, be that glue or that putty, if you will, and fill in all of the gaps. So I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't want that shepherd's hook around my neck.
I hear it's really uncomfortable. Thank you, Brian. Next, we will go to Dennis with NASCIO.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here with you all. Appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas with you today from the perspective of the state CIOs. I joined state government in New Hampshire back in 2015 after being in the tech sector for my whole career, doing either leadership in software companies of the IT function or doing commercial software development. So huge culture change for me going from software company to state government, but I find that I love it. Citizen service is extremely motivating, and that's a different kind of motivation than say stock options or restricted shares, but really great. The biggest changes we've seen with the COVID effects really have been pace. The pace of everything has just exploded, and you'll hear some more about that when we talk later in this event.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Dennis, I heard you say that the motivations are different than stock options. You didn't say better or worse. You just said different, did I?
Yeah, there's pluses and minuses, and I did have to learn how to live on less money. I'll tell you that for sure.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Next up, we will go to Franklin with NASB.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Franklin Plaistow. I'm with the state of Washington. And thank you, NASCA, for inviting us to join. We really value the relationship we have with NASCA. We work closely with Jamie and the team. I hope that statement softens the pull of the hook if I do quick crosswise with her. So it's a little anyway. My role, just a little bit about my role, is we're responsible for kind of statewide HR policy, including in our state collective bargaining, civil service rules, and the classification and compensation structure. I think collectively at our state, and of course at NASB, what we can do to ensure that we have a highly qualified, diverse workforce that meets the emerging needs of government and citizens that we serve is really what we're all about. COVID, I remember the phone call in Washington. We were kind of one of the first reported cases of a death around COVID-19. And I remember that phone call late February on a Sunday saying, the first death at Life Care Center in Kirkland happened. And nothing's quite been the same since then, and I think I'll never be the same. And I don't think many of us will be. It's been an incredible experience. I think that from this, we've learned how to work across our teams. Many of the peer groups that are on the panel with us, and that many of you on this call are on this meeting, we've had an opportunity to really learn to work more and more together, more efficiently, bring innovation, and be okay with being uncomfortable. Being a little more in the uncertain has really pushed us in new ways, and really excited to talk with you a little bit about that and share more of my experiences and what we at NASB are doing as well. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Next, we will go over to George with NASPO.
Thank you, Bram. I definitely appreciate that. These last couple of months certainly have been professionally fascinating and unexpected, certainly in both the positions that I've held as the president of the National Association of State Procurement Officials. We're a member services organization, colleagues with NASCA and others on the call. Expected this year certainly to have quite a lot of face-to-face professional development that was going to take place this last year, and it has really been instead leading a weekly call with state CPOs and contemporaneous issues. Really been able to build partnerships with the FBI and the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and others on contemporaneous issues. So it's been very different than expected. As the Chief Procurement Officer of the District of Columbia, I've been in that role for 5 years with Mayor Muriel Bowser. Again, very unexpected times. From the first calls at the end of February in the sustained operations that we've been able to maintain. We're working successfully with our emergency operators and with our health department to bring the goods and the services and the hospitals services that we've needed to the district has been very different than I would have expected, certainly.
Okay, great. Thanks, George. And last but not least, we will go over to Hope with the State Facilities Administrators.
Good afternoon. Thank you for including me and our organization in this presentation. I've actually been a career employee with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for over 35 years. And it's always been changing, but this has been a huge change. My agency is within the cabinet structure of the chief administrators. What we do is major capital construction. We do real estate acquisitions and dispositions, and we also manage and maintain many of the central state agency office buildings. And I would say that some of the biggest changes that we've seen is how do we use our office building? How do we use our spaces? People thought this would be a somewhat of a shorter duration. We'd go back to normal, whatever normal was, and now we are really just peeling back the onion or pulling the curtains back on the state and saying, wow, there's a whole lot of different ways to conduct business now in the state. And so we are constantly, we've been touching base, of course, interacting with HR and technology and, all the different aspects of how we touch people in our buildings. And I'd say that the biggest change is thinking that, well, actually, you can empty a building out and do a renovation project, and you're not going to necessarily lose productivity because, in fact, you might be able to get your project done a little faster, and you can still get your work done, which has been a bit of a surprise, but one positive outcome in a sea of unhappy events.
Okay, thank you, Hope. Yeah, we're finding in Michigan that our construction projects within buildings are going really fast now because you don't need swing space anymore. It's really nice, right? All right, well, thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm glad we didn't have to get the shepherd's hook out. I guess Jamie can save that for my 30-minute monologue that we'll do at the end of this session. But we are going to go into one more, just a little bit of warm up with our panel here before we get into some more in-depth questions. We're going to do a speed round. And so we're going to ask you each a different question and ask you to answer it in one sentence. And you get bonus points if you can actually answer it with just one word, but we'll give you a sentence. So I'm going to start with Franklin. And all of these questions are over the last few months, whatever. So Franklin, we're going to start with you. Over the last few months, the best value your agencies, and so those are HR agencies across the country, offered to others was?
You put me at one word. Humanity. And I guess what I mean by that is that I think that we've held space for a human experience and a human impact perspective of these incredibly difficult situations we have, whether it is the COVID-19 response, the larger social justice conversation. How do we bring these incredibly impactful things that are touching our lives at home, at work, and how we can think about how we can support our employees and leverage resources across other areas. Not close to one word, sorry. I started with one word, but I had to explain it, so yeah. That didn't work.
We'll take it, thank you. All right, Dennis, you're up next. Over the last few months, the governor's phone rang most often because?
Because citizens, businesses, and the press have an insatiable desire for information and direction as it relates to the COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah, agree. Okay, great. Hope, over the last few months, the biggest conflicts or competing interests were?
Masks, and I would say the dynamic between trying to be efficient with energy and having appropriate ventilation in our buildings.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Next, over to George. Over the last few months, your best friends were?
Bram, I think you're asking me the trick question because procurement officials are not supposed to have friends, right? Just kidding. The fire chief and our health professionals that were the experts in PPE that were some of the first phone calls that we made to really understand what we needed to get into, those are the friends.
Good answer. Thank you. All right, Brian, over the last few months, I had to keep the governor informed on.
I had to keep the governor informed on a lot of bad news, a lot of mistakes that were made, and how we could turn all of those lemons into lemonade and give her some positive outcomes from government that she could share at a very personal and local level.
Yeah, great answer. You know, that's what we find is what we're finding that with our staff in Michigan as well. They really want that personal interaction. You know, I do, you know, every other week live videos where I just go on with all of the employees, and they don't like it when it's scripted. They like it when we just get on and we really have that personal interaction with people.
Yeah. Every corner of the state wanted to know that they were heard. And as long as we could give that anecdotal information, it just built credibility with government.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. Well, there we go. The speed round is over, and we are going to dig into some more meaty questions here. Because we have a limited time and we do have a number of great panelists here, we're not going to ask every single person to answer each question. We have identified a couple folks to, let's say, direct the questions to, but obviously other panelists, if you have a thought, please jump in. So we're going to start out with this first question, and we'll ask Brian and Franklin to both weigh in on this, and maybe we'll let Brian go first since he's already up on the screen here. So most of those of us on the call, we represent the critical administrative and operational functions. How have your operational agencies collaborated, coordinated, recently, and have any of those relationships become more strategic as a result of the last few months?
Yeah, we're somewhat unique in Oregon. Well, I guess we're not unique, where we keep the program agencies, kind of at an arm's distance from the administrative agency. And let them set policy, operate their programs and whatnot. But what we found is as direction came into those program agencies, operationalizing the governor's instructions became kind of tricky. And as soon as we got into a cadence where the program agency picked up the phone and called DAS and said, here's my assignment, how can you help? Then we were able to kind of make the connections across program lines, or find the unique local stakeholder, or most importantly, engage procurement at a very positive level. And so we made those connections for folks, we filled in gaps, and we, I think the most effective thing is we were just able to connect people that knew the answer. And be very honest with our sister agencies. We don't know the answer, but we know exactly who you need to contact. And what we found is operationalizing instructions moved from 7 to 14 days down to 7 to 14 or 24 hours. And we also encouraged people to move forward. As soon as you have 80% of the solution, move forward and get it moving, and then adjust as you go, as you implement. So that's kind of what it's been in my experience.
Yeah, that's great. Franklin, do you have some thoughts on this?
Thank you. And I think Brian and I are in similar roles. It sounds like that. Maybe it's about being out in the West, I don't know, but there's definitely a decentralized, federated environment we have. So in my HR role, specifically for Washington, HR directors also reside at state agency levels. So I don't have that kind of, direct line. It's more a matter of influence and collaboration within the HR community to start with. And certainly as we move out further to our partners in, for instance, Director Liu, Chris Liu, who is with DES, Department of Enterprise Services in Washington, he has part of our HR functions in terms of some of the operational service sides for the recruitment system and training. And certainly our partnership on the procurement side was important as we navigated the past few months. I think that there's a dynamic that we were all responding to a public health crisis, that we as a leadership kind of group across all of these different lines of work had a commitment to following the science doing the best we could to keep people safe, to model the right behavior as how we should act as an employer, as an organization, to be thoughtful in how we respond and navigate the health crisis we had, and now even the budget situations we have going forward. I think certainly COVID provided this moment where we could all work together towards a very common goal that if you try to think about collaboration and think about how you can work together more effectively, it can get theoretical fast and people can kind of get a little less reality based. I think this crisis, this moment, called for us to reckon with a reality we had in front of us and work together in ways that we hadn't before. And I just really am excited about how we can seize that and go forward as we move into very difficult conversations going forward around our budget, structure of government, continuation of services, that we continue to have these incredibly strong relationships that were in place before, but we moved out of kind of that transactional role to really like, this is a problem no one could have imagined over hundreds of tabletops exercises. How do we do this together? And I think it really invited us to be more strategic and also to be wrong sometimes, and be okay with that, because we had, I think as Brian has said, 80% is probably as good as you're going to get sometimes of certainty. And so in some ways it invited maybe a little more vulnerability. It invited a little more kind of just openness that I think really has actually put us in positions where there's more trust. Certainly there's times that we have, conflict's a strong word, but, challenges of navigating things. But I think fundamentally we have this momentum that I'm excited about how we can proceed, because we're not out of the woods on the health issues. We're certainly not out of the woods on how we as an organization respond to larger social conversations. And we have our work cut out for us on the budget ahead of us and some really tough decisions. And so I'm really excited about those relationships, whether it's with facilities, procurement, or our budget partners, which I think are an important part of kind of the overarching policy when it comes to this, are, just to name a few, are I think so important to really build. And I'm really grateful for the relationships we had before, but just how much they've expanded since then.
Yeah, that's great. I suspect a lot of us have shared that same kind of experience. We joke as central service agencies. A lot of us are control agencies, who are the ones that have to tell other people no, right? And so a lot of the time we joke about you have to have thick skin to do this. But what I've seen, at least my experience, is we were appreciated a lot more over the last 6 months than we are usually. A lot of other agencies where we had a partnership, but all of a sudden they realize, oh wow, you're doing this for us. You're carrying 90% of the water on this issue, and so
and we
nice
care. And I think that there's times where we can be marginalized to like check the box mentality, or just you didn't follow the rules, it's coming back to you. I think that they saw us as people that saw other people as people, not issues or processes, and that we had to do the best we could. And I think that I remember the times we were trying our best to get guidance out in early March, and it was just liberating that you had these moments of people like say, help us with something and then we'll work with you on it. And I think that it invited this kind of thought process that I think we all want to have, but we don't, sometimes we can hold back a little bit on. I think this crisis kind of actually caused us to open up a little more. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So I think that, that leads right to our next question, this idea of everything, we joke, everything has changed over the last 5 months. Our relationships have changed, the places where we work have changed, our focus, the people we work with, everything. And so, we've just covered a lot of the changes that have happened, but I'm going to ask next Dennis and George to weigh in on, of the changes that you've seen in the last 5-6 months, what are those that you would most like to see sustained? So the changes that have happened because of COVID, whatever they were, what are the ones that you would most likely to sustain after COVID? And so let's go to Dennis first.
Thank you, Bram. I'm going to base my answer on some data that I'm farmed out of the NASCIO Planning and Response Guidance for State CIOs, which is published on the NASCIO website. Right off the bat, we have been engaging state CIOs on COVID-19 response, and so we actually got some real comprehensive national information on what's been going on states, and there's a lot of consistency. One of the big ones, as you might, it'd be no surprise, is, work from home, and what are the options there. So first of all, we are more productive than we expected to be, in many ways. And part of that's because the flexibility around hours and things like that, we're a very, New Hampshire's a very union state, so there's a lot of control tradition there that we had to throw out the door. Openness to positive business process changes in the work from home context. For example, everybody that had a printer or could print felt they needed a printer at their home. But so far, almost all the at-home folks are working without a printer now, and more efficiently they were before, because we said, hey, think about your business process. In fact, I heard earlier people talking about, electronic signatures and electronic processing of documents. That's so much more efficient than pushing paper. So, and then of course, potential savings on facilities costs, which hope will love and hate, right? Because I'm working on a budget shortfall, and facilities is one place I'm going to start attacking and do less of that. So another big area is we've been delivering citizen experience solutions way faster. Starts right out with quicker procurement. So you'll all love to hear that. I mean, way quicker procurement. Part of that is the governor's declared a state of emergency. He has the emergency powers to help move things along, but there's also better overall collaboration throughout the branches of government. And so that procurement piece has really been helped by that. Very fast decisions on requirements, and then very impactful is the agile approach to project management and development that's been inside the delivery of those citizen experience solutions. And finally, to call out a big one is the positive progress in the unemployment insurance space. We want to keep moving that along. Now, every state's in a different place there. Some of them are still pretty hurting, and some of them are a lot better, but we're not where we need to be. Claims processing and adjudication are a big deal, but also the digital services that mitigate call center, call deflection, that kind of stuff. So that's a small piece. So I really would encourage you, if you're interested, to go take a look at the NASCIO website. There's a lot more information there, and that's where I'll leave it. Okay, thanks, Dennis. Well, George, Dennis is talking up faster procurement times. So what do you have to add in this?
That's good stuff, Dennis. That's good stuff. From a NASCO perspective, it's getting contemporaneous information out in a real-time manner, and it's keeping that. It was necessary with COVID, so the weekly calls, but getting out tips on fraudulent companies, on how are we buying ventilators, how are we buying quarantine sites, how are you dealing with call centers, and what are the best practices and the clauses that are contemporaneous there. So being able to, we've had to adjust and pivot and really get information out quickly to members, and being able to continue to do that, I think, is a reality. On the district side, the emergency operations centers and we have obviously a number of urgent issues that happen a year in the district, whether it's an inauguration or First Amendment projects that happen downtown. So we've always had that structure. Being able, and for short periods of time, being able to continue the warehousing efforts that we've developed to be able to holistically bring in the goods for health and for PPE and for hospitals and disperse them, and having the data around that is something that we certainly have honed over the last number of months, and a practice that we want to continue. As an aside, from a human resources perspective, the tools that we've had before that we've really been able to use for collaboration and for networking, whether it's with our client agencies or whether it's with industry to negotiate contracts, we have really, I've seen, across the states, and huge increase in use of those tools, and really being able to make the most of them to continue the services that we all do as public servants, but doing it in this new environment.
Okay, thanks, George.
Sure.
And so from that, we're talking about what we'd like to sustain, but I'm sure there are some other things, other changes that we could talk about here, whether we want to sustain them or not. And so we'll go there next. Maybe we'll just stick with you for a minute, George. This question is for George and Hope. Well, let's say, what's the most unexpected or interesting change, whether that was welcome or unwelcome change related to COVID?
I think managing the $8 billion of contracts in the district every day is a new fascinating adventure. I tell you, something that has been very heartwarming and truly impressive to me over the last number of months have been the businesses that have pivoted, and distilleries that have moved to developing hand sanitizer, tailors that have moved to cloth masks. Industries that had supply chains outside of the country and were able to pivot towards that to bring in the goods on their planes that were needed here. That was extremely impressive and truly noteworthy.
Yeah. Hope, how about you?
Well, I think, the one of the most welcome things is just all the collaboration that's just been encouraged, and really everyone's sort of been all in on, both with NASFA, with all the different states that would get together and talk in roundtable formats, or just anytime there was an opportunity to kind of share ideas, and learning a lot about how all the states were managing. Sometimes we'd be on calls and some people were home, some people had already gone back to the office, and then a couple months later it flip-flopped and it was the other way with different people. So it was really good to sort of learn real time what was going on in all the different states and ways of handling things. And then at the broader level, the share, and this sounds a lot of platitudes, but just with the purchasing people at my state and with the technology people. So getting the PPE so we could run our buildings, getting the laptops so we could all be working from home, getting an updated telework policy so those who could do their work from home, had the ability to do that, plus do childcare and all those kind of things that were related, all kind of coming together. And that was just really, nothing like a crisis, really focus everybody and, laser-like. So that was really, really good. I do need to respond to the comment about cutting facilities budgets, just in that our buildings have been maybe 15 to 20% occupied, but our energy use has gone down maybe about 30%. We have to still keep the buildings running for the people who do come in. The other side of that is that everyone has been talking about how their own personal home water and energy use has gone up about 30% also. So it's been just a shifting of resources. The whole work from home roller coaster, has been kind of a positive and a negative. People have been happy working at home, then they can't wait to go back. Then when they talk about going back, they say, oh, I don't want to go on the commute. So there's been a lot of real changes in terms of perspective on how to do your job and the different ways one can do the job. I mean, you can't be an electrician running a building from your home, but you can certainly manage some of the vendors from home and things like that. One of the more unwelcome things I'd say is the crazy work hours that people have had to work, and this is not just related to facilities, this is just, everybody just trying to accommodate childcare, elder care. Everyone's trying to work their required hours, and there's been so much flexibility that managers and leaders are always working, so they could kind of respond to the flexible work schedules their staff is on. And I would say that the other thing that's been welcome is webcams. I think that we were told not to use the cameras on our laptops when we were first given them. And now they're so key to having real good conversations with people, because that visual piece is just so important to maintain some contact with people. So, I'd say overall, the best parts have been also been some of the worst parts, and vice versa. So keep the one thing I'd say that's been the most challenging is the evolution of practices to deal with keeping our buildings safe. we're still kind of waiting for some definitive guidelines on how to best maintain our buildings. You know, cleaning is kind of, the cleaning protocols have been pretty consistent, but we've moved a little bit away from the surface cleaning. You know, we're still doing it, but we're not as nervous about it. You know, now we're all worried about what's in the air and how we're moving air around and things like that. And that's been, we would love for the science to catch up. You know, we know it's just going to take its time.
Yeah, well, that's great. One of the things I was surprised about Hope, and maybe I shouldn't have been given, you know, working with real estate for a long time, but is how many people wanted to take their chairs home with them, right? Their desk.
It's huge.
Yeah. Yep. We let them if they wanted to. Yeah. All right, moving on. Franklin, let's talk a little bit about managing in this environment. So I know that NASB has some really interesting research in this space. And, you know, we know that one of the biggest challenges in managing is that kind of like middle management. How do you manage a highly mobile or remote workforce? You know, how do you keep everyone engaged? Do you have any ideas, any tips you can share with us here?
Sure. No, I think that, and this has been a topic that has been really a recurring theme amongst NASB members for quite some time about how do we step into this mobile work environment in a thoughtful way. I think public sector always has a challenging dynamic in that we could have competitors, whether it's IT or elsewhere. Certainly here in the Pacific Northwest, we have quite a few, you know, large employers that have historically been really flexible on work arrangements, while I think understandably public sector always has that dynamic of accountability, public perception, and how can we meet some of the flexibility that our employees are looking for, and new employees to the market are looking for more and more in terms of expectations around flexibility from their employer. And certainly NASB has, you know, talked quite a bit about, I think the challenge that we see in the middle of our organization sometimes is that our middle managers are always, and I hope NICE spoke to some of this even in the more recent era, but the dynamic of often we look to our middle managers, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but the people in the middle of our organization to be the executor, the change management, the leaders on kind of what we're doing to execute strategic vision and the next stage in terms of improvement in our organizations, and also managing day-to-day tasks, in many cases actually working alongside frontline employees. And so it's a tough situation to then, and we've seen this over the years, to then say, do all of that, kind of be torn between these two lives, and then also deal with everyone not being in the office. And, you know, understandably, culturally, some, you know, we are accustomed to managing by seeing. So being comfortable not seeing people is something we've seen challenges on. We have, in many of our member states, and including Washington, have looked at how we can do trainings to help with tools to keep engagement. And I think it was going okay, but then, of course, the past few months happened, and then everyone got home. It was like, get them home, get them safe. And in some ways, that was like, it was this moment that I think we now have this revitalization of this can be done. I think that a huge shout out to, I think, IT across, I think every member state on the calls that we have regular calls, have talked about how great their IT shops have been to get IT resources out to staff as best as they can. And I think that that's really been a great step in the right direction, but I think we hope nicely captured a challenge we have of how do we help our supervisors and managers stay engaged with employees as they're kind of dispersed and even working different schedules as well. We have really developed, in Washington, we developed more and more guidelines to kind of help our managers be more okay with the flexibility, to give them kind of the authorization to, again, I think provide some flexibility, step into a little more of kind of some of the uncertainty, not letting performance expectations fall by the wayside, but being a bit more flexible in how things get done. So I think really reinforcing that it's not every little detail of how it's done, but the fact that it gets done is something that I think we really tried to work with. You know, I never thought I would say in my life that we were talking about telework as a health imperative. You know, we talked about it as, in many states, talked about how valuable it was for being competitive as an employer, for getting access to more diverse applicant pools if your area of employment is not, and of course, the diverse communities. But I never thought I would be saying it's a matter of life and death that you get your employees home to work remotely. And that's what we were doing in March. We were talking about how, this was a matter of getting people home and keeping them safe, minimizing how many people were out so that the people who had to be out were out, but not exposed to additional risk of community spread. And I think even now as we reopen more and more, we've tried to do that in a very thoughtful way of, we developed some tools to help really identify who's not thriving at home. So are there work groups that are just not able to make this work? So taking a close look at the metrics you've used, identifying where they're falling short of those metrics and how you could then begin to bring them into work a little bit more. Not even 100%, but maybe finding those days where you can come in and have a few check-in points with small groups where it's socially appropriate, but not get so, not bring everyone back in, but actually be careful about you bring the people back in. And our Safe Start guidance, we're really clear about this, that you find out who you need to get back in to get the work done. And those are the ones that you focus on. Not that they could come in. If they're able to come in, but they're able to work just fine at home, let's have them stay home right now. And let's focus on the ones that are not thriving. And so we developed some tools to really help with that. And I think that helped our managers feel better that we were authorizing that we were supportive of that. And we laid that out in a lot of our Safe Start guidance that we published to our agencies. And that seemed to help, I think, people navigate that. I hope that gets to some of the points you wanted to cover, but let me know.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Yeah, and I think there's this theme of, hey, we're all kind of learning as we go here, and what can we like immediately, what do I know now that I can change tomorrow to make it better? And to the point, I think Brian made it earlier. Use 80%, act and adjust, right? Move along. So on that, along those same lines, thank you, Franklin. Along those same lines, I'm going to go to Dennis and Hope next. So from an IT and a facilities perspective, what are the most critical changes that we have to make to face the future effectively? So asking you to get out your crystal ball here a little bit, but we've learned a lot in 5 months. Based on what you know now, what's critical? So let's start with Dennis.
Oh, Bram, the timing's pretty good on this question from an ASIO perspective, because it's a little less crystal ball than it might have been even a couple of weeks ago. We have our initial data from the national CIO survey, and so I'll read you a question. It sounds an awful lot like the one you just asked me. What business processes, practices, or investments will change post-COVID-19? So I'll share the top 6 with you on our early data. One is expanded work from home and remote work options. So we want to keep making people more productive in their work at home capabilities, and we also want to make them more secure, because the cybersecurity is a different challenge with all those endpoints spread all across the state, and in some case the country. In the world, we have folks from in other countries working in the network as well. The expanded use of collaboration platforms is number 2, remote meetings, and here we are on a Zoom, so it's great that we have these, and we need to get better at using them. We need to find better ways of leveraging the new capabilities that I'm sure the suppliers will come out with. Improving digital government services. We set the bar high by responding quickly, particularly in the areas of supplying information with AI chatbots, and as well as the data analytics around what COVID was doing in communities. Investments in broadband. The entire network everywhere is now critical infrastructure. I don't think I would have considered my Comcast connection critical before, but now it kind of is. I can't, it's part of how I work. Number 5, increased priority and investment in legacy modernization. And that's very heavily focused on the unemployment insurance area, because some states, even though there was a problem back in 2008 to 7, 8, 9, when we had our economic downturn, the departments of labor, or those entities that were responsible for unemployment, didn't all get religion on scaling and modernizing, and that's caused states a lot of problems. So we need to keep working on that. And then number 6 is expanding cloud services. To the extent that states had cloud service options, it made it easier for them to move people out. For example, if most states had not enough VPN capacity, to support all of their, I see Hope nodding her head there. And I know that there's not a state that had as much VPN as they needed, but if they had cloud services already in place, they didn't need VPN for a lot of the things they had to do. They might have needed it for some of them, but not all of them. So they're, those are just the top 6. That will be published soon, so we'll be able to see, and it's a valuable tool for not only CIOs, but public policy folks to know what's going on in technology. So,
yeah, thank you. All right, Hope, how about you? What are the changes needed from a facilities perspective?
For us is thinking about how we use our state buildings. I think that the fact is we probably will not ever go back to full, like that dense occupancy we had before. But there will still be a need for a place for people to go into an office on occasion, and that you might be able to do more of the hoteling and more sharing of spaces and having a little bit less density, but maybe being able to get out some of our state leases and things like that to sort of bring more of our functions into more of a central location, and just how to really restructure the building and how the building can provide space for important government services, and whether they be public facing or back office and things like that. So I think it's really modernizing the workforce and planning for a different kind of delivery of physical space for people to do their jobs from where they can do their jobs. And I'll just say the other thing is I think there still is going to be a need for personal contact along the way. I think the Zoom is great. I think the webcam is great, but it's not the same. I think that what NASCA's done with the learning series is awesome. And NASFA had to cancel its conference this year. We've tried to make up for it with other approaches. We have great connections. People really are learning from one another. It's not the same. So just think that we have to still, and hopefully we can plan for a future where there are chances for people to really be in a room together.
Yeah. Okay, great. And I know that we're at time here. I just want to throw out just one last question. Not everyone has to jump in, but anything over the last few months, like where you did something and you wished you would have done it differently? And we probably need to keep these to like one sentence answers. But anybody want to weigh in on that?
So Brahm, one thing that I wish I had done differently is make emotional investments with my staff earlier rather than later, but I can turn it around to a positive. As we made those emotional investments in my subordinate managers, but also my peers, I think we've got some very positives that have come out of it. And I'll drop a few names, and these folks will know those names. Shannon Ryan and Jeremy Miller guided our facilities and spun up a PPE warehouse in 7 days. It went from dark to completely lit in 7 days, and that includes the work that Terrence and JB did on the CIO side, and working with each other. If there had not been built-in trust, then nothing positive could have happened. Or with Debbie Dennis, my CPO, who is now one of the biggest rock stars in Oregon and is called on directly by the governor's office and many of the state agencies because she is a problem solver. And, I think about Madeline Zeich down in CHRO and the investments and the training that I got from her on how to make these emotional investments in my staff. I think, I withdrew all of those investments in the middle of the crisis, and we did some really wonderful things. But I think the most important thing, and this is going to get back to Hope's point and to Franklin's point about those personal connections. I ended every phone call with Shannon, our facilities guru. I ended every phone call with, "How is your dad doing?" I ended every phone call with Debbie on, "How is your daughter doing right now? I know that there are special needs going on, and this has got to be a scary time with COVID." And so it always ended on a very personal touch, so that my staff knew not only are we solving the problems of the state and this pandemic crisis, but I care about you individually as well, and that every decision we make as a central agency impacts you directly as a person. So I wish we'd have just started those kinds of conversations before the pandemic had started.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, so I'm just going to apologize to the rest of the panelists. I think, I'm already a couple minutes over here, and I don't want that shepherd's hook around my neck, at least not while everyone's watching. So I just want to say thank you to everyone on the panel today. Those were great updates, great insights. And again, the relationship between NASCA and our sister associations is so important, and we appreciate everyone being on here today. So with that, we'll wrap up this panel. But I also just wanted to thank everyone, thank all of our attendees for joining NASCA over the past 3 weeks for the Summer Thought Leadership Series. I know, maybe not all of us have been able to join every single session, but, like me, the ones that we did join, it's been really excellent to come together virtually, hear from thought leaders and meet colleagues from around the country. This association is really well known for connecting individuals, and we hope that the virtual experience has allowed us to do that, even though it's obviously a little different than what we normally do. I also just want to take a moment to thank the corporate council members who generously supported this event. I know, moving from an in-person event to something that's not in person, something that's a little bit different, there was probably some concern there from the sponsors, but I know, the sponsors stuck with us through this, and this wouldn't have been possible without your support. So again, thank you to the corporate sponsors. And I also just want to thank the working group, the virtual working group, for all the work that they've done on these series. Like I said, replicating the same experience that you get from an in-person event, it's a challenge, but I think, based on what I've seen over the last few sessions, it's been very successful, and the speakers have been great, and everyone is very engaged. So on behalf of NASCA and the executive committee, I want to thank each of you again for joining this summer series. And with that, I know I'm a little bit over time here, so Pam, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great, Ron, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone on this afternoon's panel. What a wonderful opportunity to hear from all of our sister associations and just really bring the updates. It's just great. We appreciate all of that collaboration across the board, and we appreciate you all being with us. Jamie, any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, this was excellent. I am here for that virtual hook. So Bram, that was an excellent, excellent session. Thank you to our sister associations. And thank you to our executive leadership who put so much thought into this. We didn't get to cover it today, but we've also been thinking very intentionally about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we also thank all of our sister associations on working with us on that. So with that, Pam, this is the end.
Right,
We'll wrap
it
it
is.
up.
We've made it to the end. Again, what a wonderful series. We have covered about 16 hours worth of content. We hope that each of you have benefited from that and all of the insights brought from our speakers. Let me do a really quick personal shout out to our NASCA team, both Jamie, Kayla, behind the scenes. Come here, Kayla. We're gonna be socially distant, but we all wanna make sure we're saying thank you to the entire team. We've got all of our AMR staff as well. Our Richmond studio, we couldn't have done this without you either. So thank you all to Scott, the entire team, Ace, Claire, Laura, everyone there. And again, just thank you so much for dialing in for the series. Make sure you check out our learning management system that Kayla has got everything all set up for you to check out resources, bios, more information. So make sure you go to nasca.org and check that out as well. So for one last time, our Richmond studio, will you bring up our evaluation questions for the day, please? So if you'll go back to Slido very quickly, pull it up on your phone. Tell us how valuable this experience was for you this afternoon. If you strongly agree, or disagree, let us know. Again, this helps our planning. We're working on our winter series. It's going to be starting later this year. Love to know how valuable this was and if this met your objectives as well. Give folks just a moment to respond to that, and then we'll bring up our second Slido question. Thank you, Richmond team, for being on this all 3 weeks. Let us know how you feel about the session being engaging and interactive. Certainly something that we strive for here at NASCA is bringing everyone together, collaborating, connecting, bringing all new members together. Let us know how you feel about this 3-week series and if you feel it was engaging and interactive. And again, just a huge shout out to our team here in Lexington, our Richmond team in Virginia, all of our panelists that have been with us over the past 6 days, and everyone that's dialed in for the NASCA Summer Thought Leadership Series. Make sure you keep watching NASCA.org and your email for follow-up on our winter series and what that agenda will look like as well. So with that, Richmond team, take us home.
Thank you, NASCA.